Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today, let's talk about Wuthering Heights. Not the new film adaptation, which everyone is talking about. I mean, we are going to talk about that a little bit, but mostly about the novel itself. So, there is a new film adaptation out of Wuthering Heights that is causing a lot of controversy, and I have been asked lots of times over the past few weeks, both in real life and online, whether I have seen the new film, what I think of it, etc. And I have zero interest in watching the new adaptation of Wuthering Heights. I considered going to see it just to make a video about it, because I know that I won't like it, and I know that I will disagree with its takes on the book. But I don't really see the point in going to see a film that I know I'm not going to enjoy just to negatively talk about it, when I could instead tell you why the book's amazing, and why I think this is a novel that is very hard, perhaps impossible, to adapt well to screen. There are plenty other negative reviews of the new Wuthering Heights films out there. I assume there are some positive reviews somewhere, but I have not seen any. Out of all of the people I've seen mention it online or in real life, I think I have seen one person on Instagram who said they enjoyed it, and I've seen dozens and dozens and dozens of people say that it was not good in any way. I kind of gave up on adaptations of Wuthering Heights as a teenager after seeing several that I didn't really think worked, and I sort of knew I wasn't really gonna like this adaptation from the cast list and the trailer like ages ago. I think if there had been a lot of very positive reviews of it, I might have been inclined to go and see it and see what I made of it, but I have seen so much discussion of it, all of which suggests that it is bad as a film in its own right, as well as bad as an adaptation. And considering how much I love the book and how little I think the book works as a screen adaptation, and also how annoyed I get about the misconceptions around Wuthering Heights as a story and the way it has become a love story in popular culture, even though it's not a love story, it is a revenge novel. Anyway, my point is, I don't think I'm going to enjoy the new film, and I'm not going to go watch something that I don't expect to enjoy. But I thought, as everyone's talking about Wuthering Heights at the moment, I would make a video talking about why I love Wuthering Heights, some of the things I love about it, and also why I think it is a very difficult novel to adapt to screen, why I'm not sure any film or TV adaptation can really do Wuthering Heights justice, and why I definitely don't think this new film can. I will say that I do think the benefit of an adaptation of any classic novel is that it gets people reading the original book. I have seen lots of people reading Wuthering Heights on the tube over the last few weeks. So, you know, I guess if a bad adaptation leads people to the book, then that is good. On the other hand, I suppose, does a bad adaptation lead someone to pick up a book with the wrong expectations, and then they don't love it in a way they might have done if they'd gone into it with different expectations? But on the other hand, what if that person would have never read Wuthering Heights? And what if some people see the adaptation, read the book, and then love it and do appreciate everything about it? That would be great. So, you know, if a new film brings an old book more fans, I am glad, but that's probably all I have to say in favour of this new adaptation. And in general, I do feel like adaptations of Wuthering Heights tend to be not great and tend to misrepresent what the novel is. Anyway, before I get into my list of 10 reasons why I love Wuthering Heights, which is the bulk of this video, I did also want to say that Wuthering Heights is a book I have read many, many, many times, and it is one of my absolute favourite books ever. I have read Wuthering Heights upward of 12 times. I have read it 12 times according to Goodreads, but I'm pretty sure I have read it more. I think I've read it, yeah, probably 12 to 15 times. It's one of my top 5 favourite books of all time, I would say. I love it a lot. I think it's an incredible novel. I studied it at school and also at university, and I have loved studying it, and I also love reading it for fun and for study and for any reason. It's just a wonderful book. It is also a really Marmite book, and it is one of those books that I completely understand why people hate. I think, you know, to take another of my favourite 5 books of all time, Pride and Prejudice is a book that I don't understand why people don't like. I love Pride and Prejudice. There's so many wonderful things about it. And I think it's a really accessible, fun, lovely novel. And so I kind of don't really understand why some people don't like Pride and Prejudice, but I completely understand why some people don't like Wuthering Heights, because it's a really weird book full of horrible people with a really odd structure. And I completely understand why people don't like it, but personally, I absolutely adore it. To explain the premise of Wuthering Heights, to begin with, as I have already said, Wuthering Heights is not a love story. Wuthering Heights is a revenge novel. And I think if you go into Wuthering Heights expecting it to be a love story, having seen lots of the adaptations that make it a love story, which it isn't, then I think you will be disappointed. But I think if you go into Wuthering Heights expecting a revenge novel, you'll have a great time, because it is an incredible revenge novel. I'm talking like you haven't read Wuthering Heights. Many of you probably have. It is a very popular book. But anyway, the premise of Wuthering Heights. We begin in 1801 with a man called Mr. Lockwood, who has just taken on a new property as a tenant. He arrives in the Yorkshire moors, looking for solitude, or so he says, but actually he kind of misses talking to people. So he goes and visits his neighbour, a man called Heathcliff. Heathcliff intrigues Lockwood from the beginning because he doesn't look like the people around him, and he has a slightly complicated family setup that Lockwood can't quite get his head round. And so when Lockwood goes home, he ends up asking his housekeeper, Nellie Dean, to tell him the story of Heathcliff's life. And Nellie Dean does that. And this book follows Heathcliff's life across 2 generations, with his tempestuous love for his childhood sweetheart, Catherine, who we know from the beginning is dead, and the harsh treatment he received from Cathy's brother. The first half of the book is kind of concerned with that generation, and then the second half of the book is concerned with the next generation, with the children of the characters from the first generation, and sort of how Heathcliff's life changes as revenge kind of becomes a driving force in his life. And it's just a wonderful novel. So let me give you 10 reasons why I love Wuthering Heights. The first one is that it is an incredible revenge novel. As I said, not a great love story. I mean, obviously love is like an important part of this book, and love is a driving force for Heathcliff, though in a very toxic and damaging way. It's not a romantic book with a small r, though it is a romantic book with a capital R in terms of romanticism, but it is not a romantic story like something like Pride and Prejudice. It is dark and messy, and it is at its heart a revenge novel. That is the focus of the story. That is the thing that drives the plot. Think of the Count of Monte Cristo, but like much wilder and much wackier and better. I do love the Count of Monte Cristo a great deal, but Wuthering Heights is even better. It is just, in my opinion, the like epitome of revenge novels. I love that as the theme of this book and the kind of driving force of the narrative. My second reason why I love Wuthering Heights is because of its crazy narrative structure. As I said, this is a frame narrative. We start with the character of Lockwood, but we're not just following Lockwood, we are reading his diary, and in his diary he is writing down the narrative that Nellie Dean tells him, but he admits that he is abridging bits of it and only writing down the interesting bits. And then within the story that Nellie tells him, sometimes she will tell him stories that other people told her. So sometimes she'll be quoting what Heathcliff told her, or what Isabella Linton said to her, or sometimes she'll be reporting a letter that someone sent to her. So within this book, you have so many layers of narrative unreliability. There are frame narratives within frame narratives. You never know what's true. You never really get to the heart of the truth, because how can you? Because you're like finding out everything so many steps removed. And I love that. I think it's glorious. It's so gothic and fun, and it makes it so hard to know what's true. And I think that's really cool. It does make it like confusing, I think, for some readers, and you do have to get used to it and be prepared for it, but I do think it's an incredible element in this book. The third thing I love about Wuthering Heights is its use of doubling and symmetry. It, as I said, is a story of 2 generations, and the differences, but also the similarities between these generations is at the heart of the novel in many ways, and I think it's genius. I think the way we see traits carried between the 2 generations and the way we see relationships and sort of patterns carried out in different ways by the second generation that we saw in the first is just so clever. Everyone goes on about the love story of Cathy and Heathcliff, which is a terrible, toxic, messy relationship that no one should aspire to. The actual sort of positive love story in this book is in the second generation. I just think the use of doubling and symmetry is just like the coolest thing in Wuthering Heights and is done amazingly. It does again make for some confusing elements because a lot of the characters in the second generation have the same names as the characters in the first generation, which I think when you first read Wuthering Heights just does slightly mess with your head. But it is for a reason, and it is really clever, and it is really cool. I'm going to take this book down because I think I'm just like waving it around as I talk. Okay, the fourth reason why I love Wuthering Heights is because all of the characters are awful, but in such human ways. I kind of hate everyone in Wuthering Heights, and everyone kind of does hate everyone in Wuthering Heights, but that is the point. Because I dislike so many of them, but I also sympathise with them. They're all so messed up in so many different ways. I think Heathcliff especially is an incredible character because he does so many bad things, and in so many ways he is a bad person, but also I sympathise with him so entirely. And he's such a complex, fully rounded character that you feel for him and you understand why he's doing things even when he does bad things, and you understand what has been done to him in his life to make him like this. And it's so well done. Even though the characters are so dislikable in many ways, their feelings feel so real that you really feel for them and you care about them, and that just works so well. And so I know that one of the reasons why lots of people don't like Wuthering Heights is because of the dislikable characters, but personally I really enjoy feeling sorry for these terrible people. I think it's great and it's very powerful. Also, having said that I dislike all the characters, that's not true. I love Hareton. Hareton is wonderful. Let no one say anything about Hareton. He is the best. The fifth reason why I love Wuthering Heights is the setting and the atmosphere. The wildness of the moors and the isolation of the moors are so well drawn, and not just sort of what it feels and looks like to be in this place, but also how this place affects their lives. We are shown this really claustrophobic community where lots of people end up like marrying their cousins because there's just no one else to marry because they just never see anyone else. We have these two families, the Earnshaws and the Lintons, and they're basically the only families of their class in this area. And there are also not even that many other people not of their class in the area. So it's this really tiny claustrophobic community. And I think the setting of the Yorkshire moors and the sort of sparseness of the landscape and also of the people, as in there's not very many of them, I think that's just drawn so incredibly in Wuthering Heights. My sixth reason for loving Wuthering Heights is the themes. I think there are so many complex, wonderful themes explored in Wuthering Heights. Obviously, I've already spoken about the sort of claustrophobic community and revenge, but there are so many more themes that are explored so fantastically in this book. Toxic relationships, class, gender, race, cycles of abuse, grief, death, the fragility of life, outsiders versus insiders. There's just so many complex things going on in Wuthering Heights, and I think Emily Bronte balances and manages her themes so well. Reason number 7, I also love Emily Bronte's writing. I think she writes in a really beautiful and passionate and wild way, and does really interesting things with the motifs within the language. So one thing I wrote an essay on when I was at school is how the supernatural feeds into the language of Wuthering Heights. So the characters use a lot of similes and metaphors that are connected to the supernatural, which kind of adds to the feeling and the atmosphere of a ghost story in this book. And I think that's really cool. And there's a lot of other things like that that Emily Bronte is doing in this book. The language is also quite like violent in many places. And I think the way the themes creep into the way characters talk, not just what they say, but the language they're using to say it, is just really great. My 8th reason for loving Wuthering Heights, leading on from that, connects to the supernatural and the extent to which this book is or isn't a ghost story. I love the way that the supernatural permeates Wuthering Heights but always remains ambiguous. At the beginning of the book, the first time Lockwood visits Wuthering Heights, he falls asleep and has this dream that the ghost of Cathy, the girl that Heathcliff once loved, comes to his window and tries to get in. And is it a dream or is he haunted by a ghost? Who can say? And I love the way the supernatural is handled within Wuthering Heights. It's just handled with like so much atmosphere and so much ambiguity, and I just really, really like it. Leading on from that again, my 9th reason for loving Wuthering Heights is the novel's ambiguity and the narrative space within it. What I love about Wuthering Heights so much is that there are so many different ways to read this book. Like I said, I have read this book like 12 to 15 times, and every time I read it, I spot new things and I notice new things, and I interpret it differently. There are so many different ways of reading Wuthering Heights because so many things are left ambiguous. As I said, there are so many layers of narrative unreliability that you never really know who is telling the truth and what is the truth, and you have to work it out for yourself. But also because we hear about the main characters, Heathcliff, Cathy, Catherine, Edgar, Hareton, everyone else, we hear about them all from the perspective of Nellie Dean, who is a servant who is looking on at them but doesn't know their thoughts or see them in private moments, who is also very judgmental a lot of the time and has her own biases. So there are so many ways to interpret Wuthering Heights because of the narrative unreliability, because of the ambiguity, and also because there are just like large stretches of Heathcliff's life, for example, that we know nothing about. I love all of the space within Wuthering Heights to interpret. I think it's really, really cool. A year or two ago, my husband Nick read Wuthering Heights, and we made a video about it, so I'll leave that link down below. But I found it really interesting discussing Wuthering Heights with him because he read it and was immediately like, what a great ghost story. Clearly, Heathcliff is being haunted and the ghost at the beginning is definitely real. And I read Wuthering Heights and think, obviously there's no ghosts. The ghosts aren't real. And both of those interpretations are completely valid when you read the book. I love the ambiguity of Wuthering Heights, and I just think it's really cool. So there we go. This kind of ties in with my 10th and final reason for loving Wuthering Heights, and that is that it is just a really complicated novel. There are few novels that I could reread 12 to 15 times and still find new things to notice and draw on every time. It is so rereadable, and it is so fascinating, and it is so complicated and messy and weird. And I love that because it's great. And I think it just is a wonderful, incredible novel that you should all read if you haven't already. And if you have, then I hope you also like it. And if you don't, that's also fine because, as I said, super weird book. I totally understand why people don't like it. So those are my 10 reasons why I love Wuthering Heights. This video is definitely going to be much longer than I intended it to be, isn't it? In my head, it was like a 10-minute video. Anyway, the next thing I want to talk about in this video is why I don't think Wuthering Heights can really be adapted to screen. Like, I just fundamentally am not sure that you can make a good screen adaptation of Wuthering Heights. It is a novel that spans decades and has an exceptionally complicated narrative structure, and I just don't really think that can work on film. If you adapt Wuthering Heights to screen, you lose all of the narrative unreliability and all of the complex layering that is there. And so by doing so, you sort of lose what Wuthering Heights is, because the ambiguity and the narrative unreliability is so important and central to Wuthering Heights. The frame narrative is so important. The perspective is so important. You don't get the full story in this novel, and you're not meant to. But a screen adaptation where you are seeing the characters directly, like, is kind of meant to be the full story, and that doesn't really work for a book like Wuthering Heights. You know, the bulk of Wuthering Heights is told from the perspective of Nellie Dean, a servant who is observing things and doesn't have the full story, and as I said, is judging things herself. How can you make a film adaptation of Wuthering Heights when you never see Heathcliff alone, when you never see Heathcliff alone with Cathy, where you're not seeing anything that Nellie Dean doesn't see? Wuthering Heights is a story that is meant to be seen through a specific perspective, and that's not how films work most of the time. Maybe there is a way you could adapt Wuthering Heights if you did something really arty and weird, if you made it very clear it was a story within a story and Nellie Dean was in every scene, and you like left those narrative blanks. There probably is a way to do it, but no one ever does it. Basically, I think it's so difficult to adapt a novel with a narrative structure like Wuthering Heights that no one ever does anything with a narrative structure or has a nod to the narrative structure, and therefore it just doesn't work, like, because you just lose everything that's wonderful and special about Wuthering Heights. I basically feel like you can capture the setting and atmosphere of Wuthering Heights in an adaptation, but everything else that I love about it, you can't. Like, you just can't really do that on film or TV. It works as a book, and it's a great book, and I don't think it really works as not a book. I also think that Wuthering Heights is often adapted poorly to screen because of a fundamental misunderstanding about what this book is. Or perhaps not a misunderstanding, I think that is not the right word. A fundamental wish to make this book something that it isn't. As I said, this is not a love story, this is a revenge story, and if you read the novel, that's very clear. It's clearly a revenge story, that's the point. And the second generation is hugely important and vital to the story, and sort of like more important than the first generation. I would be happier to go and see a adaptation of Wuthering Heights where the first half of the novel was like the prologue at the very beginning and the rest was focused on the second generation. I would rather see that than see an adaptation that just adapts the first half of the book and the first generation, which is what many adaptations do. So many adaptations miss out the second generation of Wuthering Heights and only adapt the first half of the story, which is just ridiculous. Like, to end Wuthering Heights halfway through is to entirely miss the point of the book. It's like adapting The Count of Monte Cristo and stopping the film after Edmond Dante gets out of prison before the introduction of the Count of Monte Cristo. And that's not a spoiler because that's like the premise of the Count of Monte Cristo. I can't understand why you would adapt Wuthering Heights and cut the second generation. To miss out the second generation is to entirely change the premise of the book and therefore miss the point of the book. And yet so many adaptations do it. And I think that is because these adaptations don't actually want to adapt Wuthering Heights. They want to make Wuthering Heights into a different thing that it isn't. And that makes me really sad because what this thing is so good. In missing out the second generation when adapting Wuthering Heights, you turn the greatest revenge novel ever written into a not very good tragic love story. And that's just makes me sad because Wuthering Heights is, as I said, so good. I think the problem with Wuthering Heights adaptations is that they miss out the second generation, and by doing so they perpetuate this idea that Wuthering Heights is the sort of great tragic love story, not a revenge novel, and therefore more people talk about it like it's a great tragic love story, and therefore they go into Wuthering Heights expecting a great tragic love story and don't view the second generation as important, even though that's the whole point of the book. As I said, there is this issue of the two generations and the book spanning a long period of time, but also because of the complicated narrative structure, I don't really think you can adapt Wuthering Heights well to screen. I'm just not sure it can be done. But if it can be done, it definitely is not being done in the new Emerald Fennell film. As I said, I'm not going to go and see the adaptation because I know I won't like it, because I know that they have only adapted the first half of the novel. And as far as I can tell, barely adapted that. Like, they've not only cut out Hareton and young Catherine and Linton from the second generation, they've also cut Hindley from the first generation. And just like, what's the point? If you're not even having Hindley, like, obviously that's not Wuthering Heights anymore. Once you take out the revenge themes and the themes of cycles of abuse, you've missed the whole point. So that's my main problem with the adaptation. That's the main reason why I have no interest in going to see it and why I know it will not be a good adaptation. I do have other problems with the adaptation too, from the little bits I've seen. You know, the costuming is obviously like wildly inaccurate and the casting is all wrong. Catherine does not reach the age of 20 within Wuthering Heights. Again, not a spoiler, you know from the beginning that she's dead. So the ages are wrong. And as many people have pointed out, the casting of Heathcliff isn't right and feels poorly considered, to say the least. There is a lot of debate about Heathcliff's ethnicity in Wuthering Heights, whether he's meant to be Romany, whether he's meant to be black. I feel like I hear fewer people say that Heathcliff might be Asian, but you can definitely argue that from what is in the text. Heathcliff's ethnicity is purposely left very ambiguous, but it is always clearly stated throughout the book that he looks different to those around him. He is othered by his appearance throughout his life, and this is definitely part of why he is treated the way he is by characters like Hindley. The themes of class and race are very intertwined in Wuthering Heights and are very important for the story that Emily Bronte is telling. Heathcliff is described as dark-skinned within the first sort of few pages of the novel. He's also frequently described as being Romany, not with that word, but the word that is used is a slur, so I'm not going to use it. It is difficult to know whether Heathcliff is actually meant to be Romany because the G word was used in the Victorian period both to mean Romany but also as a sort of like shorthand to mean other or foreign or wild. The use of this word was very rooted in prejudice, so it's very difficult to know whether Heathcliff is meant to be Romany or whether other characters are just saying that he looks different. He is also described in the book as a little Lascar or an American or Spanish castaway. And if you don't know what the word Lascar means, Lascars were sailors, usually from South Asia, sometimes from other parts of Asia or Africa. In the Victorian period, the primary connotation of the word Lascar would have been with India. Nellie at one point says to Heathcliff, "You're fit for a prince in disguise. Who knows, but your father was emperor of China and your mother an Indian queen, each of them able to buy up with 1 week's income Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange together, and you were kidnapped by wicked sailors and brought to England. Were I in your place, I would frame high notions of my birth." There is a lot of ambiguity around Heathcliff's ethnicity in the book, not just sort of on the page in the way he's described, but also for Heathcliff himself. He doesn't know who his parents are. He doesn't know about his background. But the one thing that is not ambiguous in the book is that Heathcliff doesn't look like the people around him, and that he is made to feel like an outsider partly because of the fact he doesn't look like the people around him. That is incredibly thematically important within Wuthering Heights, and I think adaptations casting Heathcliff as white comes back to the same point of adaptations missing out the second generation. It comes down to people adapting Wuthering Heights but actually not really engaging properly with the text and not really adapting what this book is, but making it into something else. I'll leave down below a really great video made by a YouTuber called Princess Weeks. The video is called Heathcliff Isn't White, and it's a really fantastic video which goes into a lot more detail than I have just given, and also has like a lot of really great sources in the description. So I'll leave that down below if you want to find out more about this topic. Anyway, as I said, I personally don't think Wuthering Heights adapts very well to screen. I have seen 4 adaptations of it, all of which I saw quite a long time ago when I was a teenager. I've seen the 1939 film, which I think has a lot to answer for because it was the first adaptation that missed out the second generation, and that kind of set a precedent for other adaptations to do that, even though, again, as I said, missing the whole point of the book. I've also seen the 1992 film, which I generally just didn't think was great. I also weirdly don't like Ralph Fiennes at all as an actor, which is, I think, a very controversial opinion. But anyway, I've then also seen the 1998 TV film, which does adapt the second generation and is fine. I, to be honest, don't remember this adaptation very well. I would be interested to rewatch it, but I don't remember it being particularly standout because, as I said, I just don't think the things that are amazing about Wuthering Heights really adapt well to screen. I have also seen the 2009 TV series with Tom Hardy, which again does do the second generation and is pretty good. Like, as Wuthering Heights adaptations go, it's quite good. It's fine. It does adapt the story, and there are a few particular things it takes out of the subtext of the book and does more with, which I like. But again, I don't love it that much because I fundamentally don't think Wuthering Heights works very well on screen. So there we go. Those are the only 4 adaptations I've seen. I haven't seen any others. I watched all of those as a teenager and then was like, you know what? I've kind of given up on Wuthering Heights adaptations because it doesn't work on screen. I was initially very excited to see the 2011 film, which has a person of colour playing Heathcliff for the first time, but I understand that that film also doesn't adapt the second generation, so that makes me much less interested in it. Do let me know if anyone has seen that and if it's worth a watch. But I am disappointed that it doesn't have the second generation in because, as I said, that misses the whole point of the book. So that was a long ramble. Basically, I'm not going to go and see the new film because I think it sounds bad and it sounds like it's entirely missed the point of the book. But maybe I should reread Wuthering Heights for the 16th time because it's wonderful and I love it a lot and I highly recommend it. But also, as I said, it's a super weird book that you might not like, and if you don't like it, that's fine. This is one of those books that I completely understand when people don't like because it's so strange. But it is fantastic, and if you do like it, you will probably love it. It is just a work of genius, in my opinion. It is a complex, fascinating, incredible revenge story, full of messy, horrible people that you feel for, and it's written magnificently with a complex narrative structure that works fantastically, and its themes are so powerful and interesting, and I love it. And that is why it saddens me to see people making adaptations of it that don't really engage with what this book is. But, you know, as I said, I guess if it gets some more people reading the book, maybe they will fall in love with it and see it in all its glory. Anyway, that is quite enough rambling from me. Do let me know down in the comments your thoughts on Wuthering Heights, both the novel and the new film. That's all for now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.